Welcome to TV Trash. Part of the challenge of being an online critic is when there's a piece out there that you feel you have to look at, even though you know other people have reviewed it before. This is why I've held back on stuff like reviewing Star Trek episodes due to Sci-Fi Debris' prominence in that area. So far, the only thing I reviewed from that franchise was the infamous Season 3 premiere Spock's Brain from the original series, which many have ridiculed as being quite possibly the worst of the original set due to its ludicrous, nonsensical plotline. But no, I can't call it the worst. To me, the series finale, Turnabout Intruder, is not only the worst episode of the original series, it's a good candidate for the worst episode of the entire franchise, and yes, I'm including the likes of Threshold and A Night in Sickbay. Why is it such a big turd? Let's take a look at the Star Trek episode Turnabout Intruder and find out.
Captain's log, star date 5928.5. The Enterprise has received a distress call from a group of scientists on Camus 2 who are exploring the ruins of a dead civilization.
I figure another year of these captain's logs will give me enough to write my own book. I expect it to be a bestseller. The Enterprise crew has arrived to assist a team of research scientists that are dying of radiation poisoning, but one of the doctors there happens to be another one of Kurt's old squeezes.
I hoped I wouldn't see you again.
I don't blame you.
The year we were together at Starfleet is the only time in my life I was alive.
If she starts singing Alanis Morissette, I'm out of here.
Your world of starship captains doesn't admit women. It isn't fair.
Me. Okay, good. What? Now, of course I didn't watch this show in its first run, having been born more than a decade later. I think it was the late 90s that I first saw this episode, so of course I can't get what its context was supposed to mean. But ultimately, it looks like they're saying that in the utopian future that Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek is supposed to take place in, women are still declared unequal to the point that they can't be military officers! Less than 3 minutes in and you've already made this one of the most unbelievable storylines in the entire series! Not even Spock's brain did that! But at least Dr. Lester has a gung-ho take-charge personality to the point where she stuns Kirk with a phaser, I think, and then proceeds to use this Aztec wall-like contraption to, get this, completely switch their minds! I'd say this was the dumbest case of them using this plot device, but I've watched the Lindsay Lohan remake of Freaky Friday. And no, what exactly the device is and how it works like that is never explained. I think it's hinted that it has something to do with the civilization that used to live on this planet, but it's never taken into full detail, so we're just guessing. Otherwise known as Lazy Hack Writing 102.
Janice Lester takes the place of Captain Kirk. Only this Captain Kirk is not afraid to kill.
Quiet!
Believe me, it's better to be dead than to live alone in the body of a woman.
Oh yeah, hordes of people complimenting you, willing to do any tasks for you, bending over backwards so you will acknowledge their presence. I'm not saying women don't have hardships, but there are two sides to each coin. But Dr. Lester's co-conspirator, Dr. Coleman, arrives back with the other Enterprise crew before he can kill her, or she can kill him. Ow, my brain! And they have no choice but to beam everyone back to the Enterprise.
How can death be explained now?
I tell you, it can't continue.
You killed every one of the staff. You sent them where you knew the Celebium shielding was weak. Now, why didn't you kill him? You had the perfect opportunity.
So yes, villain for this episode. Not the Klingons or the Romulans or even Tribbles, but a murderous, psychotic, power-mad woman who can't handle a level of gender inequality that shouldn't even exist in Star Trek canon! That's another problem this episode has. We're not even through the first act, and already Janice Lester has proven to be a thoroughly despicable human being, which normally isn't a problem for a villain, except that in most of the Star Trek original episodes that I've watched, the villain of the episode usually comes off as sympathetic in some form or fashion, which leads to Kirk and the crew coming to some sort of compromise with them in the end. Even a feminist like me already has no sympathy for Dr. Lester, and trust me, it's only going to get worse from here on out.
Now the years I spent studying every single detail of the ship's operation will be tested. With a little experience, I will be invulnerable to suspicion.
But she clearly didn't study its crew, as she didn't know it included a logical thinker that would argue against her plan to drop her body off at an inferior medical facility.
I point out that Starbase 2 is on the direct route to our destination.
Sir, if the diagnosis of Dr. Lester's illness is the critical problem, then the Venetia colony is definitely not the place for her.
Agree to take Janice to the Starbase. Say you want to drop her off yourself alone because of your personal history with her, and then claim that she died before you got to the medical facility. Geez, Janice, you're really not good at thinking on your feet. Just like a woman, right, Gene? And when the bridge crew continues to argue against her, she doesn't really take it well.
Our arrival at Beta Aurigae will merely be delayed.
I believe that Starfleet will have to be notified that our rendezvous with the starship Potemkin will not take place as scheduled.
Mr. Spock, if you'd concentrate on the areas for which you are responsible, Starfleet Command would have been informed already.
And that's only the start of how bad she's going to let her emotions get in the way of her thinking. Just like a woman, right, Gene? McCoy begins to naturally suspect that something might be wrong with Jim. Not sure what was the bigger red flag, him taking him off Lester's case, or the fact that he's filing his fingernails. So he demands that Jim be subjected to a physical and mental examination, which Janice is finally forced to acquiesce to. Dr. Coleman tries to convince Kirk that he actually is Dr. Lester, and that goes about as well as you'd expect. Geez, either this guy was taking villainy advice from Janice or vice versa. And so Kirk then convinces the nurse to go get Mr. Spock to see him. And then, rather than wait for Mr. Spock to arrive, he tries a lame attempt to escape, which only results in him getting captured again and put under heavy guard. Geez, Jim, was there a residual of Janice's intelligence left in there? Kinda like Oswald's was left in Sam Beckett? Jim finally convinces Spock that he is who he is, and Spock's response is try to sneak him out of his cell by putting the neck pinch on the guards, not figuring that Janice would just send even more guards after him. Good night, the stupid is spewing out these characters like it's Mount Vesuvius. Spock gets put on trial, and it's here that Janice takes advantage by bringing Kirk in as a witness so she can berate him. I'm guessing like she'd been berated by men in the past or something.
I'm going to have to ask you a few more questions. I'll try not to upset you.
Yeah, I was imagining Billie Jean King beaming in out of nowhere and just backhanding her over the skull with a tennis racket.
Can you tell me why Dr. Janice Lester would agree to this ludicrous exchange?
Yes, to get the power she craved. To attain a position she doesn't merit by temperament or training. And most of all, she wanted to murder James Kirk, a man who once loved her. But her intense hatred of her own womanhood made life with her impossible.
I shall not withdraw a single charge that I have made. You are not Captain Kirk. You have ruthlessly appropriated his body, but the life entity within you is not that of Captain Kirk. You do not belong in charge of the Enterprise, and I shall do everything in my power against you.
And brace yourself, people, because here comes perhaps the most infamous line of the original series, since Brain and Brain, what is Brain?
It is mutiny! Deliberate, vindictive, insane at its base! But mutiny is charged!
I wonder if this episode got greenlit because they knew it was the last, and William Shatner wanted an excuse to just chow down on all the scenery before it ran out. These actions are enough to convince both Bones and Scotty to not vote in favor of the captain, and her response is to declare them all guilty of mutiny and sentence them to death, which is immediately explained is not even legal under Starfleet regulations. Yeah, that's a way to convince them you're Captain Kirk. Instead, it succeeds in turning Sulu and Chekhov against the captain, and you know what's coming next.
You have received your orders. You will obey my orders!
Yep, overreacting, screaming, and whining about not getting your way. Just like a woman, right, Gene? I'm sorry, I don't care if I get called out by diehard Trekkies for this, but this entire episode, starting with that plot hole about women not being allowed to be captains, puts into serious question the claim that Gene Roddenberry was one of the more progressive thinkers of his time. Much of that claim is based on how Roddenberry wanted the crew of the Enterprise to be half female and originally wanted Michelle Barrett to be the first officer. However, I think there was more than a conflict of interest there because Gene was dating Barrett at the time and went on to marry her, and it's actually suspected that his real reason for wanting so many women on the cast is because that there would be plenty of women on the set for him to flirt with. It's actually rumored that he once stated he considered women to be just tools in a man's shed. Yeah, that's progressive thinking. It may not be completely fair to accuse Gene of this, especially since he's not alive to defend himself, but this episode does little to counter that claim by showing a female mind in command as totally unstable and incompetent. Say what you will about Captain Janeway, and yeah, Mr. Debris has said a lot about her, but she was in the unenviable task of having to navigate Voyager home from thousands of light years away with a ragtag crew partially made up of space pirates. And considering she got them home in the end, I'd say she did a pretty good job. This does nothing towards supporting the equalization of women, and if you think Roddenberry doesn't deserve some of the blame for this, I'll get to that later. Anyway, trying to wrap this up, Janice's latest outburst starts to trigger the Deus Ex Machina, and the personality swap begins to reverse.
For a moment, I thought I was up on the bridge.
Perhaps you were. And it's possible the transference can be broken.
Well, if it happens again, I'll fight to stay there.
With pretty much no other options left, Janice just tries to come up with an excuse to shoot Kirk on sight, but they're not able to do that before Deus Ex takes full effect.
I've lost to the captain. I've lost to James Kirk. I want you dead. I want you dead. I want you dead. I'm never gonna be the captain.
You know, it really takes something special for a hardcore supporter of women's rights like me to say something like, "Shut up, bitch!" And the episode pretty much ends with them deciding to leave Janice in Dr. Coleman's care and just ignore the fact that she's a murderer who tried to steal command of a Federation starship.
I didn't want to destroy her.
I'm sure we all understand that, Captain.
Her life could have been as rich as anyone's. If only...
If only what? She'd learned her place as a good little woman? Congratulations, Kirk! You've made me hate you too! This episode sucked! It's bad enough the story has plot holes the size of craters, but its implications are so deep in misogyny that it's sickening for a show supposedly so progressive. And the final straw? Yeah, Roddenberry wrote the episode! And I know I've said before that writers don't always deserve all the blame or credit for an episode, but I seriously doubt that Fred Freeberger was able to force the original creator to make a story he wanted. This episode has forced Star Trek fans like SF Debris to come up with crazy retcons, like suggesting Janice was just so crazy in her opinion that Starfleet captains couldn't be women, which probably is still better than anything I could come up with as an excuse. But even still, yeah, this thing is bad. This is the way the original series ends. Not with a bang, but with a resounding splat. It's really sad when a Star Trek episode comes off as more masochist than sports talk radio. See you next time on TV Trash.